When it comes to Tengu plant format, I am a chef. I am always cooking up new deck lists and ideas to try. Unfortunately, I have a very busy schedule and therefore rarely have the time to fully iron out my ideas and give all of these decks a try. Fortunately for me, that's where you guys come in. While I may not have the time to commit to ironing out these deck lists, I do have the theory on paper ready to go, and it's up to you guys to take these ideas, run with them, and maybe even play them in some tournaments. And that is why I've decided to create this series known as The Process. Alright guys, welcome to episode 1 of The Process. The basic concept behind this series is I cook a lot of decks up, and during that time I have these ideas that I can't really fully flesh out because I don't really have the time to play in the tournaments, but I don't want to just leave these ideas just on paper, just sitting on my dueling book account, so I wanted to bring them to you guys so you guys could explore basically the concepts. I'll go over the theory behind the deck, why I think it could work or why I think it's interesting. Some are completely jank, some might be really good, some are, just a little weird or more unique takes on already established builds. Either way, I just thought it'd be cool to showcase some of my ideas so you guys could give them a shot and then I could get feedback. And feedback to this series is probably the most important thing. I really want to know how you guys feel about this so I know if I can make some more videos like this. This is something I've kind of been mulling over for a while, so if you guys like this and want to see more videos like this, then please let me know in the comments, and also give me your feedback on the decks I make, and let me know how testing went or if you have found better ways to optimize it. All these are just going to be rough draft builds that I think could potentially work or go somewhere, and then it's up to you guys to kind of decide where you want to take these and run with them from there. So we're just going to get right into it, and we'll start with this card right here. Alright, so the main theme of today's deck is going to be Arcana Force the World. Now, the reason why I kind of started messing with this card is because it came out reprinted in the Speed Duel set as a nice secret rare, so I picked myself up a playset and I started cooking, right? And this is a card I've messed with before, but I didn't really fully iron it out, and then, it just got a little wonky, but I hadn't really taken it into Tengu plant format and really focused on it. So I decided to do that and kind of make a build around this card specifically. Now, if you don't know what this card does, its effect is, if this card is summoned, toss a coin, and if the result is heads, once per turn during your end phase, you can send 2 monsters you control to the graveyard, and skip your opponent's next turn. If the result is tails, once per turn during your opponent's draw phase, add the top card of their graveyard to the hand. So you can literally skip your opponent's turn, which obviously, as you guys can probably process, has some really powerful effects to skip an entire turn. People complain about some hand traps, like for example, people sometimes say Maxi is a turn skip card. This is the literal turn skip card. This card actually just makes it so your opponent doesn't get a draw phase, standby phase, any of it. So this is a card that I thought was really, really interesting because theoretically, once this resolves, it's literally during every end phase of your turn that you can trigger this if you have the monsters to tribute. So I thought that this was really fancy because in theory, this could mean you could OTK or even FTK your opponent if you get the right card set up. And that's kind of where the idea of this comes into fruition. That being said, the alternative is if you hit tails, the problem is you're giving your opponent cards back from their grave to their hand, which is actually really, really scary, because they could play a monster reboard, get that card back to their hand on the next turn. There's just a lot of issues with it. So this is kind of a high risk, high reward concept, which I just thought was kind of funny. But the fact that it can FTK or even OTK just by resolving its effect with this build that I've been working on, to me is really, really cool. And just for full disclosure, I have completely accomplished an FTK with this deck in practice. Typically I'll just play on my phone against AI, but I have literally won turn 1 where my opponent didn't have Valor and I just won the game off of this. So this is doable, and we'll kind of start going into how I approach taking this build and how I wanted to build around this card to make this possible. Alright, so this is the build I've landed on. Now this is the perfect deck for you if you're someone who doesn't want to outplay your opponent. You just want to outluck your opponent. If you feel like Yu-Gi-Oh is a coin toss and you don't think it matters what you do to win, this is the perfect deck for you because Arcana Force is literally just going to win the game on a coin toss. If you hit heads, you are going to win the game if your graveyard is properly set up. And the whole point of this build is to completely rely on that as your win condition. Are there other ways to play this? Definitely. Could you put a few better cards in? Probably. But that's not the goal of this list. The goal of this list is to win the game off of Arcana Force the World, and I find that hilarious, which is why we decided to fully flesh out in my mind, the best way to do this as reliably as possible. So let's just hop into the build and kind of talk about the synergies, and you can kind of see where I was going with the thought process behind this build, right? So obviously we have to have 3 Arcana Force the World. The issue with this card is you need to hard draw it, which hard drawing a win con is not ideal, even if it's a 3-of, which is why we have so many tools to mill or do whatever. We have cards like Foolish Burial, we have cards like Card Trooper, we have Tuning, which can mill, we have Card Destruction, which can just pitch your whole hand and draw another one. Our goal is just to cycle through the deck as quickly as possible. If you mill this card, that is a-okay, that's fine. That's honestly sometimes ideal. And the reason for that is because the second set of synergies we have with this deck is Quick Draw Synchron. I feel like this little Synchron package is almost essential for the function of this deck, because what this can do is this allows you to go into Drill Warrior, and then you can use Drill Warrior to recycle your Arcana Force the Worlds. There are multiple reasons why you want to be able to do that. One of the main ones is because in the event that you do manage to summon this card, whether you tribute summon for it or special summon it, there is a chance that it lands on tails. And the nice thing about being able to recycle this card is, let's say you have multiple copies either in your hand or graveyard. By using Drill Warrior, you can constantly re-tribute summon the same Arcana Force the World to get it off the field, because that secondary effect, while isn't completely game losing, it is pretty nasty to give your opponent, you know, cards back. Like, for example, when playing the Agent matchup, I would sometimes hit into a Gotchi to put a Gotchi in, or a Shine Ball into the grave, so that would be the card that gets added back to their hand. It's not amazing, but that's like kind of like the least worst case scenario. Or if you can manage to kill like an extra deck monster, so that just goes back to their extra deck, it doesn't hurt as much. But basically, once you get this on the field, if it hits tails, you probably want to get it off the field. And that's where having cards like Drill Warrior are really nice, because you can cycle through some of your tribute summon monsters. Like, you can even get back things like Tragodia if you need to tribute summon just to get this rid of this. The nice thing is if this effect doesn't resolve, like, so if it hits tails, or if your opponent Veilers, you don't even get the coin toss, so it basically just becomes a 3100 vanilla. But if it, like, at the end of the day, it is still a 3100 monster, so like, it does have high attack, so it does have pretty strong board presence, even if its secondary effect is kind of nasty and you want to kind of remove it from your own field if it fails. That's also where enemy controller can come in to help you. The other thing that has absurdly good synergies with this list is Swap Frog. This is also why Swap Frog is in here as well. Not only does it set up Treeborn Frog, which helps you get to tributing summoning your Arcana Force the World, and even continuously resolving its effect each turn to end your opponent's turn, just by basically bring back the Treeborn Frog, and then you can tribute it during the end phase for your Arcana Force the World when you do hit heads. This also allows you to use Swap Frog's second effect to bounce a card. You can bounce the world back to your hand, and you can also cycle Swap Frogs by using Drill Warrior to add Swap Frog back. So if you summon this and you don't want to try to tribute it, you can also use Swap Frog to return it back to your hand. So this gives you a bit of a fail-safe. You're basically playing your own game with yourself. You really don't care too much about interacting with your opponent. Obviously, back row does hurt a bit for Arcana Force the World, but it just kind of depends on the matchup. This build isn't designed to counter back row decks, but you could easily side into heavy back row hate just by cutting maybe the enemy controllers, and then just going into like triple MST with Heavy Storm, and that should probably be enough to get you where you need to go. But that's where I really like the synergies. The Swap Frog can set up getting Ronin Toted in your grave. You just have a lot of ways to bring back something from your grave to always have tribute fodder for either the tribute summon of Arcana Force the World or the tributing 2 for its effect. One of the main cards that's going to supplement this is Samsara Lotus. If you don't know what this card does, this has been used in a lot of really gimmicky stuff throughout history, but for this deck, its function is it's a level 1 non-tuner, so this can help just be normal summon to use with Quick Draw Synchron, but during your end phase, you can special, if you have no spell or trap cards, it functions similarly to Treeborn Frog, you can special summon it, and you can special summon as many as you want. So by running multiple, you could literally have 2 of these in your grave, and then basically during every end phase, these can summon themselves, and you always will have the materials required to tribute, so you can have Arcana Force the World end your opponent's turn. So that's obviously pretty good. I like using this card because even in conjunction with something like Treeborn Frog, where you can only summon one of them, you have like the chance of having a Treeborn Frog and Samsara, that's still going to be game if you can resolve it. And we also have cards like Level Eater. Level Eater, since Arcana Force the World is a level 8, you got Tragodia being a level 10, and even just your synchro like Drill Warrior will reset itself. You can basically always get a Level Eater on the field, and this is also phenomenal synchro fodder for Quick Draw Synchron and for the likes of your other like tuners. And it also, you know, just works as a good non-tuner to get your Drill Warrior on the field as well. Like, you can discard it, it's phenomenal discard fodder. All these cards just kind of have the inherent synergy of they can be discarded. You can kind of do whatever you want with them, but they also all fill the role of stalling a lot of time. You can basically just summon a bunch of Level Eaters in defense and then constantly loop Drill Warrior to try to block as many attacks as possible to kind of wait and try to set up for the Arcana Force of the World. The reality is regardless of how oppressive your opponent's board gets, if you manage to resolve Arcana Force the World with heads and you have Samsara Lotus and Treeborn Frog live, or just 2 Samsara Lotus, you get to win the game, because they don't get to use, like, if they have Hyperion and a bunch of monsters on the field and you can constantly just end their turn, you basically have all the time in the world to draw the outs while they sit there without a draw phase. So you basically just win the game if this resolves. You have all the time in the world to break their board, so you don't really care too much about what they're doing as long as they don't end the game. That's also where Tragodia has phenomenal synergies with this deck. Obviously, you can hold the cards in your hand. If you take some damage, you get to summon this, but also it has really good synergies with the likes of Level Eater, where you could basically have Tragodia target another high-level monster in your graveyard and always have the space for Level Eater every single turn. You can use Tragodia effect to increase its level, then have Level Eater eat that level, so you can permanently loop that, which is really, really cool. So that gives you the ability to always add extra monsters. If you have a bunch of Level Eaters in your grave and you get the Arcana Force of the World on the field and you have Tragodia, you can kind of just loop that without needing the Samsara Lotus or the Treeborn Frog. But overall, I thought this deck was really cool just for those functionalities. We also have the Dandelion, like, in just the plant tuner package. One thing to note is Samsara Lotus is a plant, so you can use Spore to banish a Samsara Lotus if you're not using it and synchro with it. One thing to note about Samsara Lotus is it does have to summon itself in attack position during the end phase, so you don't really want to do it, because during your standby phase you're also going to take 1,000, so it's going to be a 0 attack monster in face of attack position that also burns you for 1,000 on your next turn. So you got to be really careful when you summon this card back, because if your opponent has like a BLS, they can do 6,000 damage to you just by like attacking Samsara Lotus and attacking you directly. So there is some volatility to this card, but it is phenomenal for setting up your Arcana Force of the World, which is of course the main objective. We're not on BLS. You might think we have a lot of darks and we have a couple lights. Why not be on BLS? The main reason is because we have the single effect failure to loop with Drill Warrior. Space is really, really tight in this deck. At least that's how I feel about it. So I don't really have the space or the luxury of space to like run multiple effect failure. I would if I could, but the way I see it is as you need it back, you can just add it back with Drill Warrior. But the only lights are going to be this effect failure and then the 3 Arcana Force the World, which you don't really want to banish because you want to loop them until you set up your win condition. So that's why we're not on BLS, but we are on DAD, because we do have plenty of darks, and the darks can level modulate. You know, you can adjust the graveyard just by using Level Eaters and stuff like that. So this can easily set up DAD for you, which is why this card is phenomenal in this deck. But yeah, tons of different options you can go to. You can basically just play it like a standard synchro strategy. This is reminiscent of Himne's like Piper quick draw build, but the one issue I had with that deck is you would draw into a lot of empty card advantage. My goal is fill the grave really fast and then establish your win condition being Arcana Force the World. And you can basically try your hand at doing that as many times as your opponent allows you before you lose or win, right? So that's where I think this is pretty cool. In the extra deck, there was like 3 extra spaces I didn't really need. Like, I don't necessarily think you need Black Rose, but I put Black Rose in there. And then Gotchi is here just for the Swap Frog Ronin package. If you want to set up your grave and then make it Gotchi, that's fine. Levier I put in here. The only way you could reasonably make it is with like double Card Trooper Trag, or like a mind control play. But in theory, bringing back a banished Treeborn Frog or something could be really, really helpful. So I wanted it there as an option, even though it's very unlikely to be used. The rest of this I think is pretty important. You have like Junk Destroyer. This card goes so hard in this deck because you summon a quick draw. Let's say you have a couple Level Eaters or a Treeborn or even Samsara Lotus on field. You can basically make this a pop 3 every time you use it, which is really, really good. We have Junk Archer. This also comes up. It's pretty nice just to remove annoying pesky monsters for you, especially if there's cards that you just can't really out with attack. I mean, luckily Arcana Force of the World has 3100, which outs most boss monsters, but if for some reason your opponent has like Colossal Fighter on the field, you could in theory circumvent that by permanently ending their turn and just Junk Archer banishing it every turn, which is kind of funny. Drill Warrior is absolutely essential. We're only on 2 because I didn't think there would ever be a scenario where I would summon all 3. If there is a world, then you definitely would cut like Leviair or something to like supplement this, because Drill Warrior does perform a very important role in the deck. And then lastly, it's just like Bryanak, Librarian. All these cards are pretty self-explanatory. You can easily pull off the Librarian formula combo. You can even pseudo loop that combo just because of how OP Level Leader is, and like Drill Warrior can add back formula with an already established Librarian on the field, and you can kind of just keep synchroing and doing cool plays like that. So yeah, that's kind of it for the deck. I do have a small gameplay example where I can show you how I did manage to pull off the FTK. I will say doing it as an FTK is extremely unreliable and honestly really risky. You are literally coin flipping in multiple ways. If your opponent, you basically have to make sure your opponent doesn't have Valor, because you're going to go minus -1,000,000 to summon Arcana Force the World turn 1. So if they don't have Valor, that's step 1. Step 2 is you have to hit heads with it and like have a properly set up graveyard. It is manageable to do turn 1, and I'll show you an example of that. But if you get Valored, you probably lose the game. It's kind of up to you if you want to take that chance, but if you don't get Valored, you win the game, which I think is kind of funny. So yeah, I'll let you guys take a look at the example, and then you guys can just take this idea and run with it. I want to see what kind of builds you guys cook up. If you have any comments or suggestions on what to do with the build, what you've done with the build, or even any tournament experience with a deck like this, it'd be really cool to hear your guys' thoughts. So we'll hop right over into that example. All right, so jumping into this first replay, obviously looking at my hand, I probably could just go off with a Drill Warrior combo with like Dandy and play a slower game and maybe get this win con at a later time. Might be a bit better, but I wanted to gamble. I wanted to go for the FTK. As you can see, we're rewarded, never punished. We hit the heads because we're a gambling man. We have the Level Leader and the Samsara in grave. And in case you guys didn't notice, you can actually trigger the Samsara Lotus before you resolve the Arcana Force the World in the end phase, which means you can always summon back the Samsara Lotus before Arcana Force the World triggers, which means, as you can see, I'm just skipping all my opponent's turns. They don't get to play the game at all. They got all the cards to out this board, but they can't use them because I'm always going to end their turn before they get to play. So I just thought this was a cool FTK. I've never FTK'd in a way like this. I don't even know if you could consider this an FTK because, you know, I'm technically not winning on the first turn. I get multiple. My opponent just doesn't get any. And for this second replay, I actually managed to do the FTK with a bit of a failsafe by summoning the Swap Frog on the field and then doing Quick Draw and Level Eating my Quick Draw and tributing those two. I now can technically use Swap Frog to bounce my Arcana Force the World in the event that I don't hit heads. But of course, we're a greedy boy and we hit heads anyway. Now see, I don't have Samsara Lotus or Treeborn here, but because I have Level Eater and Ronin Totem, it allows me to set it up for this first turn, and now we have Treeborn Frog set up for the second. So as you can see, I can slowly play this out and eventually get my graveyard up to indefinitely loop this, and we're kind of slow stalling for it. So we got the Treeborn Frog set up now. With Card Trooper, I can try to mill a Samsara Lotus. I don't hit it, but Level Eater is more than enough, and we've got plenty of turns to stall before this becomes a problem. All right, guys, so as we bring this video to a close, I just wanted to kind of go over a few last minute things, you know, that I kind of was thinking about. So one thing to note is with Dandelion, I know you guys saw I had Dandy tokens in that replay, and you probably were like, well, why didn't you just tribute those? It's actually not a tribute. It is sending your monsters to the graveyard. So tokens don't get sent to the graveyard, so they don't work for Arcana Force the World, which is obviously why I can't go about doing that. Dandy tokens are basically there just to stall for time. You know, you want to put a bunch of useless monsters on the board for your opponent to attack over. Also, Dandy tokens can't be tributed the turn they're sent to the graveyard for a tribute summon, but they can be tributed for enemy controllers. So that's another interesting thing. Like, let's say you have a level eater on the field and you have Arcana Force the World and 2 Dandy tokens. You could, in theory, enemy controller one of your opponent's monsters by tributing the Dandy token to trigger the turn end effect to get you a turn to set up and stall, which is kind of just unique. Also, level eater can't be used for a tribute except for a tribute summon, so you can tribute summon it, but you can't tribute it for enemy controller, and you still can send it to grave for the likes of Arcana Force the World, as you guys saw in my replays. So some of these cards just have weird interactions with one another, which is just something to keep in mind. But for the most part, Level Eater, Dandy, all these cards just function as a way to put a bunch of useless dudes on the field, block as many attacks as possible to stall until you can establish your OTK. Is this deck a reliable FTK? Probably not, you know. In fact, I would say definitely not. Is it a little goofy, a little silly? Yeah, definitely. But it, in theory, can work. You know, technically, if you're the luckiest guy in the world and you always hit heads, you could take this to a tournament and just sweep some people, because it will catch your opponent off guard. And you know, if they don't run Valor, they will be punished. Their maxis can sit there and you know, die with pride, I guess, because Arcana Force the World don't care about your maxis. They just care about your Valors. So yeah, that is basically it for this video. We're gonna wrap it up. I'm going to put the download link to this deck in the description of this video, as well as a link to my Discord. What I'd like to see is if any of you guys got inspired by this and you want to show me your ideas, like how you decided to change up the build, whatever it is. Like I said, this is just my starting point for you. I want to see what type of paintings you guys put on your canvas. I want to know what your ideas are and how you think you could make this deck built better, or how you could play around Arcana Force the World better. I'm super interested in seeing the ideas. There's all kinds of different ways to go about this. For example, Samsara Lotus is a dark. You could run things like Armageddon Knight, stuff like that, because even Level Eater is a dark. There's all kinds of different unique ways to approach it. So I'd love to see what your guys' ideas are. So we'll put the download link in the description. I'd love to see what you guys do with it, and then share those ideas in my Discord. So both links will be available to you. But that's going to wrap it up for this video, you guys. So just let me know in the comments what you think about this deck, what you think about the series. I would love to know if you guys want to see more videos like this in the future, if you like seeing the new ideas and, you know, see what you guys can do with them. But we're just going to give a quick shout out to my patrons. So shout out to Eric Gagnon, Beast Eyes, Slap God, My Dude, Photo Shooty, Brian Ford, and Sven Elbrand. Thank you guys so much for the support. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe, and have a great time dueling today.